Welcome to Griffonomics. Usually when we look at a company's financial report, there is this comforting expectation of precision.
Right, like engineering.
Yeah, exactly. You look at the balance sheet, the revenue goes up, the profits go up, and the analyst just points at the chart and says, there it is, healthy.
Right. It's supposed to be binary. I mean, we like the math to be visible, to be neatly categorized in a spreadsheet where 2 plus 2 always equals 4.
But then you step into the world of massive corporate mergers, global defense contracts, and, well, shifting nuclear budgets. And suddenly that clean, precise X-ray machine is completely broken. We are looking at a financial and diagnostic landscape today that is, well, honestly, it's incredibly murky.
It really is.
Imagine running a business where a global economic meltdown actually guarantees your next sale. Or, where a catastrophic geopolitical crisis is literally modeled into your 5-year revenue projections.
It is the absolute definition of muddy waters. Because you are no longer just analyzing a company's ability to sell a product, you are analyzing their ability to navigate global volatility.
Exactly. And that is exactly why you are here with us today. We are on a mission to cut through the absolute noise of earnings calls, the dense financial jargon, and the optical illusions of accounting to understand a massive fundamental transformation.
Right.
Our premise for today's deep dive is Cadre Holdings and what we are calling the vertical scale inflection analysis.
A very fitting title, honestly.
Yeah, so we are tearing apart a mountain of sources today. We've got earnings transcripts, Q1 2026 financial reports, M&A slides, and a highly detailed Griffonomics lead industrials analyst report.
Good reading.
Oh, definitely. We're using all of this to see how a company traditionally known for making police holsters accidentally, or perhaps brilliantly, became a cornerstone of global nuclear and military defense.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is the sheer scale and audacity of the pivot. You have a company fundamentally known for standard police duty gear, and they are now aggressively acquiring their way into the absolute elite tiers of defense.
Right.
It's not just a subtle shift in their product line. I mean, it is a fundamental rewiring of their corporate DNA. The tension between their long-term strategic vision and their short-term quarterly reality is just palpable in these documents.
Yeah, and if you are sitting there wondering, why does this matter to me? Well, whether you are prepping for an investment meeting, trying to understand how industrial M&A actually works in the trenches, or you're just insanely curious about how global businesses operate behind the curtain, this is a masterclass.
100%.
This is a masterclass in how companies build a massive impenetrable moat around their business, how they intentionally insulate themselves from normal economic downturns by finding revenue that is literally mandated by law.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about survival and scale.
Yeah.
It's about how you engineer a company so that even if the broader macroeconomy goes into a brutal recession, your customers are legally obligated to keep buying from you.
Right.
That is the holy grail of industrial strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand what Cadre is doing, we have to look at how they are evolving. They are moving from being a standard law enforcement supplier into what the analyst report calls a $5 to $8 billion total addressable market industrial compounder.
A massive jump in TAM.
Yeah, massive. And the catalyst for this, the engine pulling the train right now, is their acquisition of a company called TYR Tactical. The transaction value we're looking at sits between $145 million and $185.2 million, depending on how you account for the total enterprise value and the financing.
Right, and to understand why they dropped nearly $200 million in capital, we have to look at the legacy of Cadre's main brand, Safariland. Safariland has utterly dominated state and local law enforcement for decades. If you see a local police officer walking down the street, there's a very high probability they're wearing a Safariland holster or Safariland concealable soft body armor.
They completely own that market.
They do. But soft armor and standard duty gear have distinct limitations, both physically and financially.
Right, because soft armor, which is usually made of woven synthetic fibers like Kevlar, is designed to stop handgun rounds. It's flexible, it breathes a little, it's meant to be worn for a 12-hour everyday patrol.
Exactly.
It catches the bullet like a microscopic tennis net. But TYR Tactical is playing a completely different game. TYR's specialty is hard armor.
Which is a whole different beast.
No, we're talking high-performance ballistic plates, heavy-duty tactical vests, ballistic shields. This isn't for the local traffic cop. This is for federal agencies, SWAT teams, and global militaries who are facing rifle threats and armor-piercing ammunition.
Exactly. Soft armor catches a bullet, Hard armor shatters it, and the manufacturing required for that is entirely different. The sources specifically highlight that TYR recently won major contracts with the Danish and Swedish armed forces.
Which is a crucial distinction.
It really is. Safariland had a massive geographic footprint. Cadre's products are in over 100 countries. They have 21 manufacturing facilities, but their international presence was largely national police forces.
Right, not military.
Exactly. TYR brings them directly into the European military sphere. In fact, TYR does about 50% of its $92.6 million in annual revenue internationally. They are deeply entrenched in Northern Europe.
So we have Safariland dominating local cops in the U.S. and TYR dominating federal agencies and European militaries. I look at this and I think, well, okay, cross-selling sounds great on a PowerPoint slide, but how easy is it really to get a local police department to buy military-grade hard armor?
It's a fair question.
Is this like a consumer car company suddenly buying a Formula One engineering team and trying to sell a multi-million-dollar race car to a completely different demographic? Because frankly, it sounds like a massive distraction.
I wouldn't call it a distraction at all. I mean, it's actually a highly sophisticated supply chain play. Let me explain why your Formula One analogy, while good, sort of misses the mechanical reality of this merger.
Okay, Demi.
It's not about selling the F1 car to the commuter. It's about bringing the F1 engineering back to the commuter car factory. The sources explicitly note that there is minimal customer overlap between the two brands.
Wait, minimal overlap is a good thing. Usually you buy a company to cross-sell to their existing customers.
You do, but you also buy them to acquire capabilities you don't possess. Cadre is taking Safariland's massive established engineering team and integrating them directly with TYR's selling teams and vice versa.
I see.
Because Safariland critically lacked the advanced manufacturing capabilities for this next-generation hard armor.
Right, the analyst report mentions that TYR brings in state-of-the-art hydraulic presses and massive industrial autoclaves.
Yeah.
Let's break that down, because autoclave just sounds like a giant oven. How does this actually change the business?
It changes everything. Making military-grade hard armor plates requires advanced materials. We're talking specialized ceramics, ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene composites.
You can't just stitch those together on a sewing machine.
Definitely not. They have to be bonded and cured under immense localized pressure and extreme heat in an industrial autoclave. It's a highly precise, highly regulated thermal baking process.
Wow.
Yeah, and if the temperature or pressure is off by even a fraction, the internal structure of the ceramic is compromised and the armor fails. Safariland simply didn't have that infrastructure at scale. TYR did.
So by acquiring TYR, Cadre didn't just buy a shiny new customer list in Europe. They bought the literal physical capability to manufacture a higher tier of product. They verticalized their offering.
Precisely.
Now, when Cadre walks into a massive procurement meeting with a federal agency, they aren't just pitching the holsters and the soft vests. They're pitching the entire survivability suite, from the soft armor worn underneath to the hard ceramic plates worn on top in an active shooter situation, manufactured entirely in-house.
Exactly. They capture the entire margin of the officer's loadout. But here is where the vertical scale strategy transitions from just being a smart manufacturing play into what I consider a financial fortress. The entire business model is wrapped in what the analysts call a non-discretionary moat.
Yes, the moat. The report says 60% of Cadre's product revenue is locked into safety-mandated refresh cycles.
This is the critical piece for any investor or analyst to internalize about Cadre. Their revenue isn't based on consumer whim. It's not based on whether a police officer decides they want the newest, coolest vest.
Right.
It's based strictly on legal liability.
The data points here are fascinating. Body armor has a strict, scientifically mandated safety refresh cycle of 5 to 10 years. EOD bomb suits, which they make under their Medang brand, have a 7 to 10 year cycle. Even basic duty gear, like the belts and holsters, have a 4 to 7 year cycle before the materials degrade.
Let's put ourselves in the room during a municipal budget meeting. A city is facing a massive deficit. The mayor says to the police chief, "We have to cut spending across the board."
Yeah, standard budget crisis stuff.
Right. The chief might agree to delay buying new squad cars, but if the city equips its officers with expired body armor, armor that has passed its 5-year warranty, and an incident occurs where an officer is shot and that degraded armor fails.
Oh man, the liability.
Exactly. The legal, financial, and political liability for that city is catastrophic. It is indefensible in court.
So replacing that armor at the end of its 5-year warranty isn't a discretionary budget choice you can just redline out of existence.
Yeah.
It's a mandatory, legally binding line item. It doesn't matter if the city's running a surplus or a deficit, they have to buy the armor.
Exactly. So Cadre's CFO is sitting there looking at a master calendar, knowing exactly when 60% of the products they sold 5 years ago are going to mathematically expire and legally mandate a new purchase order.
That's incredible visibility.
It provides a baseline of revenue visibility that most industrial companies who are fighting for every single sale every quarter can only dream of.
But wait, if this moat is so great, and they have this guaranteed visibility, what does the actual cash register look like right now? Because PowerPoint slide decks are one thing, but to see if this aggressive acquisition strategy is actually working, we had to look straight at their unbilled orders.
The backlog.
Right, we have to decode the backlog. And this is where the numbers in the Q1 2026 report get really, really big. Cadre reported a massive record-breaking backlog of $355.4 million.
To put that $355.4 million into context, that is a $166 million sequential surge just from the previous quarter, Q4 2025.
Wow.
Yeah, a nearly 87% year-over-year increase. In the industrial manufacturing sector, that kind of vertical jump in unfulfilled orders is astronomical.
Right, so naturally, the first thing any analyst does is break that $166 million surge down to see if it's real growth or just an accounting trick.
Yeah.
Where did it come from?
Good question.
The sources show that $57 million of that surge came directly from adding TYR Tactile's existing backlog into the mix. So you buy a company, you get their unfulfilled orders. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, standard M&A accounting.
But that still leaves a staggering $108 million in pure organic growth that Cadre generated on its own in a single quarter.
And when you see $108 million in organic growth in a 90-day window for a company this size, you have to find the source. And the source is a massive contract win over in Europe.
The GDELS contract, General Dynamics European Land Systems. This is an $87 million contract awarded to Cadre's Medang subsidiary to provide blast attenuation seats for military vehicles.
Specifically, the upcoming production of the MOAG EGLE V4x4 and 6x6 armored vehicles.
This raises an important question about the nature of defense contracts. Because reading a flashy press release is one thing, but understanding the actual mechanical engineering and the subsequent cash flow is another entirely.
Right. These blast seats are not just chairs, they are highly engineered survival systems. They are designed to protect the driver and the occupants against the dual blast threats of landmines and improvised explosive devices, or IEDs.
Yeah, the engineering specs describe a need to mitigate a sudden vertical acceleration followed by a slam-down effect.
Right, the slam-down effect. Let's really picture the physics of that because it's terrifying.
Okay, set the scene.
You are a soldier strapped into an armored vehicle. An IED goes off directly underneath the hull. The sheer kinetic force of that explosion violently throws the entire multi-ton vehicle upward into the air.
That's the vertical acceleration.
Exactly. The armor prevents the shrapnel from penetrating, but the kinetic energy transfers directly through the floorboards into the occupants' bodies.
And that's only the first half of the trauma.
Right, because gravity wins. The vehicle reaches its apex and then crashes violently back down into the crater it just created.
That secondary impact, the slam down, is brutal. It rapidly compresses the spine of everyone inside. Historically, that slam down can cause catastrophic spinal injuries that are just as lethal or permanently disabling as the initial blast itself.
Exactly. So Medang is engineering a seat that physically attenuates or absorbs the kinetic energy of both the upward blast and the downward slam.
It essentially uses advanced shock absorption and stroke mechanisms to decouple the soldier from the rigid hull of the vehicle.
Right. It isolates them from the shock waves. It is incredibly sophisticated, life-saving technology. But here is the financial reality that the market often misses.
Yeah.
This is a 7-year contract.
Okay, let's unpack this timeline. The $87 million is sitting in the backlog right now. It looks amazing on the Q1 report.
It does.
But management explicitly stated on the earnings call that while there might be some small initial shipments this year, the vast majority of these blast seats are expected to physically ship out into 2027 and beyond, matching the vehicle production schedule.
which means that while the $355.4 million backlog is objectively huge, it is not a near-term cash register. The revenue from the GDELS contract will be spread over the life of the 7-year vehicle program.
Right.
It secures Medang's position as a Tier 1 engineering partner through 2031, which is fantastic for long-term stability, but it absolutely does not help them hit their immediate revenue and profit targets for this current year.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the $87 million seat contract is mostly a 2027 story, what is actually paying the bills this year? Because we know they have another massive contract sitting out there. The Department of War's $50 million blast exposure monitoring contract, or the BMO contract.
And the BMO contract is a perfect, somewhat frustrating case study in how government indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, or IDIQ contracts work. The headline number that goes out to the press is a $50 million maximum ceiling.
But the government doesn't just hand a defense contractor $50 million on day one and say, have at it.
Definitely not. And from an accounting perspective, this is where you really have to read the fine print. The sources note that none of the Q1 $108 million organic increase is tied to this massive $50 million BMO award.
Why? Because the initial firm order, the first actual legally guaranteed tranche of money, was only $10 million, and management recorded that $10 million into the backlog last year in 2025.
This is the exact timing mismatch that trips up casual observers and retail investors. They see a new $50 million press release in Q1 and assume the backlog is about to explode again.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But the actual firm backlog addition was only a fraction of that, and it happened months ago. The remaining $40 million of that contract ceiling isn't guaranteed. It's entirely subject to future federal budget appropriations, operational needs, and standard government cancellation clauses.
But let's talk about what the BMO system actually is, because the technology is wild. It is essentially sensor as a service for brain health monitoring. Warfighters wear these highly calibrated sensors during training and combat, particularly when they are firing heavy weapon systems like artillery or doing explosive breaching, literally blowing reinforced doors off hinges to enter a compound.
It's incredible.
The sensors precisely measure and record the blast overpressure that the soldier's brain is subjected to.
It's a fundamental shift from reactive medical care to proactive, data-driven triage. Traumatic brain injury, or TDI, from repeated low-level blast exposure is a massive issue in the military.
Absolutely.
The BMO system provides real-time, objective data updates to team leaders, commanders, and medical personnel. If an operator is exposed to too much concussive force during a breach, the commander's tablet lights up instantly.
So they know immediately that this soldier needs to be rotated out.
Exactly, allowing them to make rapid triage decisions or dynamic adjustments to their tactics right there in the field before a permanent injury occurs. It's incredible. So they're protecting the spine with the seats and the brain with the sensors. But bringing it back to the financials, the GDELS seats are a 2027 story. The $10 million BMO tranche, however, is expected to ship entirely this year.
Right.
So we have a massive backlog, but a very specific, almost fragile timeline for when that backlog turns into actual operating cash. And before we can fully answer how they're going to navigate that timeline to hit their 2026 targets, we have to look at the absolute wildest pivot in their entire corporate portfolio.
We need to talk about their highly specialized, deeply complex nuclear division.
Yes. The infrastructure pivot, nuclear resilience, and their follow-the-fuel strategy. Now, I want to be extremely clear right here, right up front for you listening. We are not taking a political stance on the current administration's shifting budget priorities. We are strictly, 100% impartially, analyzing the business implications of the Department of Energy's resource allocation exactly as it is presented in the source material we have. Exactly. Our job is to follow the capital, not the politics. And the capital in the global nuclear sector is moving rapidly, creating massive ripples for companies positioned in that space.
Cadre's nuclear group is fascinating because you look at a company that makes police holsters and SWAT gear, and certainly you turn to page 4 of this report and realize they are heavily involved in the global nuclear life cycle.
It's a huge leap.
Yeah, the slide deck breaks this down into 3 sweeping phases: cleaning up the past, securing the present, and enabling the future.
Historically, a massive part of their nuclear revenue came from environmental management, cleaning up the legacies of the Cold War and past nuclear incidents.
Right.
We're talking about massive, multi-decade remediation sites like Hanford in the U.S. and Sellafield in the U.K. Cadre provides the highly specialized containment units, the robotics, and the safety equipment required to deal with legacy radioactive waste safely.
But Cadre realized they couldn't just rely on cleanup, so they implemented a strategy called Follow the Fuel. The idea was to capture the long-term economic tailwinds from the entire nuclear process, from generation to disposal.
Good in theory.
Right. But according to the Q1 analysis, this Follow the Fuel strategy just hit a major, highly publicized speed bump. There was an executive order that abruptly suspended the plutonium downblending program.
Yeah, that was huge news.
And, crucially, the Department of Energy's 2027 budget submission slashed non-NNSA funding, which is the specific budget bucket that mostly includes clean energy spending and environmental cleanup, by a massive 11%.
If you are an investor looking at an 11% cut to your primary government funding source, your initial reaction is likely panic. You might think the entire follow the fuel strategy has stalled out, but if we connect this to the bigger picture and look past the headline cut, you have to look at the entire Department of Energy budget allocation.
Right, because while the cleanup funding was slashed by 11%, the overall DOE budget actually increased by 10%. How does that math work? Because the administration simultaneously surged funding for weapons and reactors by a massive 11%.
The priorities shifted overnight from environmental remediation to aggressive national defense and weapons modernization. And this is exactly where Cadre's intense diversification saved them.
Okay, how so?
Management views this budget shift not as a disaster, but as a net positive, because their nuclear group is highly purposefully exposed to this exact defense surge.
Let's look at the specific business units involved here, because this is where the hardware gets fascinating. Cadre has 4 distinct units ready to capture this defense money. First, you have NFT, which makes engineered and advanced transportation containers.
Specifically, something called SI Villa containers.
Right, and the sources note these are absolutely vital for the nation's new weapons modernization program, which explicitly mandates the manufacturing of 80 new plutonium pits, the explosive cores of a nuclear weapon, by the year 2035.
Making 80 plutonium pits requires moving incredibly sensitive, highly radioactive materials across the country. NFT provides the engineered SAVUI containers to safely and securely transport those materials without incident.
It's a huge logistical challenge.
It is. Then you have their Wallace-Miller unit, which manufactures industrial robotic arms and remote handling systems. If you are handling newly minted, highly enriched weapons-grade material, human hands aren't touching it. You're doing it remotely behind lead glass.
That makes total sense.
You also have RPS, which provides the critical ventilation, filtration, and containment systems for these new, upgraded nuclear facilities. And finally, you have PSC, which builds the critical fail-safe alarm systems.
So I have to ask, is follow the fuel just a clever corporate buzzword for, hey, we really hope this surge in defense spending bails out our sudden losses in the environmental cleanup sector? I don't buy that it's perfectly planned.
Well, why not?
It feels a bit like a company selling shovels during a gold rush, but suddenly the government says you can only dig on the north side of the mountain. Good thing Cadre just happens to make shovels for both sides.
I wouldn't call it just selling shovels. It's actually a highly sophisticated geopolitical hedge. Let me explain why. They didn't just stumble into this. They purposefully acquired companies like Alpha Safety and Zircaloy to build a comprehensive, full-spectrum nuclear portfolio.
So it was intentional.
Completely intentional. They anticipated that over a 30-year time frame, government priorities would inevitably ebb and flow between defense posturing and environmental responsibility. By having top-tier capabilities in both cleanup and weapons modernization, they hedged their bets against the exact budget volatility we are seeing right now.
Okay, that makes sense strategically. But what about the cleanup side? Is that business just dead for the foreseeable future?
Not at all, and this is vital to understand. Management described this lull as a timeline mismatch. The suspension of plutonium downblending means there is a gap between the mandate to safely remove surplus plutonium by 2037 and the actual scaling of advanced reactors that can reuse that material, which isn't slated until the late 2030s.
Oh, I see the gap.
But the environmental cleanup of sites like Hanford is a multi-decade, legally binding government mandate. The thousands of gallons of radioactive waste don't just disappear because the budget got cut this year.
Right, it just sits there in the tanks waiting.
Precisely. The current lull is just a bureaucratic delay. Management emphasizes that despite this short-term funding headwind, there will inevitably have to be an inflection point where cleanup activities accelerate massively just to meet the government's enduring legal obligations to the surrounding communities.
So the long-term thesis is safe.
The long-term thesis of the nuclear division remains completely intact.
So the overall strategy is incredibly aggressive. They are verticalizing with TYR to capture the military armor market. They are seamlessly pivoting to defense in the nuclear space to capture the DOE surge. And the backlog is sitting at a record $355 million.
It sounds great on paper.
This story sounds absolutely bulletproof. But if we turn the page and look at the actual Q1 financial report, there is a massive, glaring optical problem, a profit gap that we need to forensically test right now.
And this brings us to the financial forensic, because the income statement tells a very, very different story than the glowing backlog press releases.
Let's read the hard numbers. Q1 2026 net sales came in at $155.4 million. That is up 19.5% year over year.
What?
Almost 20% top-line growth, driven mostly by successfully adding TYR's revenue. Fantastic.
Yep, top line looks great.
But then you look further down the sheet. Adjusted EBITDA is $21.1 million. That is completely flat year over year. Zero growth in earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And then the absolute kicker, net income, the actual bottom line profit.
Oh, boy.
$2.0 million.
Which is a massive, highly alarming 78.6% drop year over year.
78.6% drop. If I am an investor and I see a company's sales go up 20%, but their profits drop almost 80% in the exact same quarter, I am slamming my hand on the panic button.
You'd have every right to be concerned.
And to make it worse, their net leverage, their debt ratio, jumped from a very comfortable 1.1x to roughly 2.9x. They are now sitting on $365.8 million in total debt because of the massive acquisition financing required to buy TYR.
This is exactly why you have to read the footnotes of financial reports, because what you are looking at is heavily influenced by M&A accounting rot. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the literal mathematical cost of growth.
Okay, unpack M&A accounting rot for us, because frankly, I am frustrated on behalf of the investors. How does 20% more actual sales result in 78% less profit?
It comes down to two specific isolated line items in the Q1 report that drag down the net income but don't necessarily reflect the health of the daily operations. First, there is $3.16 million in TYR transaction fees.
Bankers got to get paid.
You have to pay the investment bankers, the corporate lawyers, the consultants to execute a deal of that size. That is a one-time cash expense that severely drags down the quarter. But the bigger, more confusing culprit is a $2.56 million charge for something called inventory step-up amortization.
Inventory step-up. Explain the mechanics of that, because honestly, it sounds like absolute accounting magic designed to confuse people.
It is a strict accounting rule under GAAP. When Cadre acquired TYR, they didn't just buy the brand name and the factories, they bought the physical inventory sitting in TYR's warehouses on the day the deal closed. The ballistic plates, the raw nylon, the finished tactical vests.
Okay, standard inventory acquisition.
Right, but under purchase accounting rules, Cadre is legally required to revalue that acquired inventory from its historical manufacturing cost up to its current fair market value.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me the government makes you pretend you paid retail price for the wholesale inventory you just acquired just because you bought the whole company? That's infuriating. How does anyone accurately value this?
It is deeply frustrating for analysts, yes. Think of it like buying a shoe store. The store has 1,000 pairs of shoes that cost them $10 each to make. You buy the whole business.
Okay.
The accounting rules force you to write down that those shoes are actually worth $50 each on your balance sheet, because that's what they sell for. So when Cadre actually sells that TYR vest to a customer in Q1, the cost of goods sold, the COGS, on their income statement is artificially inflated because of that step up in valuation.
So higher COGS means a significantly lower gross margin, which flows all the way down to a lower net income.
Right. It severely squeezes the paper profit. You look at the income statement and it looks like you made zero money on that vest. But it is entirely a non-cash optical illusion.
So the real cash flow is fine.
The actual cash economics of manufacturing and selling that vest haven't changed at all. You still collected the cash from the customer. It's simply an accounting penalty for making an acquisition.
Okay, I hear you. Let's separate the accounting fiction from the operational truth. You're saying the 78% drop is mostly an optical illusion. But I'm still looking at that 2.9x leverage ratio. Taking on hundreds of millions in debt is not an optical illusion.
No, The debt is very real.
Doesn't a 2.9x leverage mean they've essentially maxed out their corporate credit cards to buy this growth?
The debt is absolutely real. It is a very tangible risk. In doing this deal, they reduced their cash position down to $41.3 million, and they took on $365.8 million in total debt. When your leverage spikes to nearly 3 times your earnings, your margin for error shrinks dramatically.
Right, because you have to service that debt.
The interest expense is a real heavy cash drain every quarter that also contributes to that flat EBITDA. You cannot afford an operational execution error. You cannot afford for demand to slip.
Which is the perfect segue, because if your credit cards are maxed out, you desperately need consumer and municipal demand to remain rock solid so you can make those interest payments. But management just issued a massive warning on their earnings call about that exact thing.
Yes. The CEO, President Brad Williams, explicitly warned analysts of, and I quote, softness in demand for discretionary type items within their company-owned distribution segment.
Let's look at the distribution segment. It's about 20% of their total revenue. It acts as a one-stop shop for first responders.
Right.
They sell the high-margin Cadre equipment they manufacture themselves, the Safariland holsters, the vests, but they also sell third-party products to round out the catalog. Uniforms, optics, boots, flashlights, firearms, ammunition.
And management noted a distinct uptick in publicized budget challenges for various cities across the country. Municipalities are feeling the pinch of inflation and shifting tax revenues, and when a city budget gets tight, that tightness translates directly into potential cuts in state and local law enforcement budgets.
So a police chief sits down, looks at his strained budget for the quarter and says, we don't have the money. We're going to hold off on buying new boots for the patrolmen. We're going to hold off on upgrading the flashlights. Those are discretionary items.
Exactly. The department can comfortably delay buying third-party boots. But here's the critical distinction management made during that warning. They have not seen any indication of a drop in spending for Cadre's proprietary safety products.
Because of the moat. We are right back to the non-discretionary moat. You can tell an officer to wear his old boots for another 6 months, but you absolutely cannot legally delay replacing his expired bulletproof vest. The liability is too high.
Precisely. And this leads to a fascinating, almost counterintuitive dynamic in their financial profile. Because Cadre doesn't manufacture the boots or the flashlights, they're just acting as a middleman distributor for those third-party items, the profit margins on those distributed goods are much, much lower than the margins on the proprietary safety gear they manufacture in-house.
Wait, so what does this all mean? Are you saying that a decline in selling boots and flashlights actually helps their overall profit margins?
In a percentage sense, yes. If the lower margin distribution sales fall away because cities are broke, but the high margin non-discretionary manufactured sales remain steady because of legal mandates, your overall margin profile actually improves.
That's wild.
It acts as a margin tailwind mathematically, even though top-line revenue might take a slight hit in that specific distribution segment.
That is the ultimate irony of their business model. A municipal budget crisis makes their profit margins look more efficient because they only get to sell the really expensive high-margin stuff.
Yeah, it's quite the dynamic.
And speaking of the consumer side, the sources also point out a really interesting divergence in the broader market. Overall, consumer demand for handguns is currently down. The macro environment for firearms is declining. Yet, the Safariland brand saw a 6.7% growth in the consumer channel.
It speaks volumes to the power of the brand. Safariland has incredibly strong, almost cult-like brand awareness among shooting enthusiasts and off-duty personnel. They are successfully gaining market share in a shrinking overall market because of premium brand positioning and a constant cycle of new product innovations.
That makes sense.
The logic is simple. If a consumer is only going to buy one holster this year instead of 3 because money is tight, they're going to buy the premium Safariland option.
Speaking of focusing on high-margin proprietary products and dominating the consumer channel, let's look at how Cadre handles the distressed consumer brands that they acquire. The analyst report calls this the alien gear play.
This is a perfect micro-study of their broader operational strategy. Cadre acquired a consumer company called Alien Gear Holsters for $10.3 million. Compared to the massive TYR acquisition, this is a very small, bolt-on deal.
The analyst report explicitly classifies this as a distressed asset play, or potentially a strategic tech grab for Alien Gear's proprietary shapeshift modular technology.
Yeah.
But $10.3 million, I have to push back here.
Okay, push back.
Cadre is out there chasing multi-million-dollar international nuclear contracts and outfitting European tanks with blast seats. Isn't a $10 million distressed consumer holster company a massive distraction for the executive team? Why bother? Or is this just a cheap fixer-upper house they bought at bankruptcy auction and plan to flip to private equity for higher rent?
It's absolutely a fixer-upper, but they aren't going to flip it. They are going to renovate it from the studs up using something called the Cadre operating model, or the COM.
The calm. Let's talk about that, because the slides we have show this elaborate, very corporate wheel for the Cadre operating model. It's got core values listed like integrity, curiosity, excellence, empowerment.
Lots of corporate buzzwords.
It talks about lean principles, Kaizen tools, 5S, Gemba walks. Honestly, it sounds like a management consultant's dream. Does any of this actually mean anything on the factory floor?
It does, but you have to look past the buzzwords. It is heavily based on classic industrial lean manufacturing principles pioneered by companies like Toyota. And Alien Gear is exactly where they are going to prove this model works.
So it's a testing ground.
Sort of. The goal isn't just to own the brand name. It's to fundamentally overhaul the physical operations. Cadre already utilizes highly efficient injection molding and sewing processes for its legacy Safariland products. They have perfected these specific manufacturing lines over decades of trial and error.
So the plan is to take those perfected efficiencies and directly inject them into the struggling Alien Gear production line.
Exactly. Let's take a Gemba walk, for example, which is one of the terms you mentioned. Gemba literally translates to the actual place. Instead of executives looking at spreadsheets, they go down to the actual sewing line.
Okay, like that.
They realize that a worker has to walk 3 feet to grab a bin of nylon for every holster. The COM steps in, reorganizes the floor plan using 5S principles, and moves the bin right next to the machine. It saves 5 seconds per holster.
Wow, that adds up.
You multiply those 5 seconds by tens of thousands of holsters a year, and you have just significantly lowered the unit cost of manufacturing. Suddenly, the margins on that distressed Alien Gear holster look exactly like premium Safariland margins.
That is brilliant. You buy the distressed asset at a massive discount. You apply your operational excellence to strip out the waste and fix the cost structure, and suddenly you have a highly profitable product line generating free cash flow.
Exactly.
But the report says it's not just about the factory floor. It's also about brand optimization. The sources note they have already kicked off joint integration teams consisting of personnel from both Safariland and Alien Gear.
Right, evaluating how to cross-position the brands without destroying them. Safariland is the premium, duty-grade professional standard. It's what the cops wear. Alien Gear has a huge following in the everyday civilian concealed carry market.
So they address different markets.
Exactly. By bringing them together under one corporate roof, Cadre can capture maximum market share across the entire spectrum. The civilian buys Alien Gear for everyday use, and the professional buys Safariland. And Cadre collects the revenue from both, without the two brands cannibalizing each other in the exact same demographic.
It's a textbook execution of portfolio aggregation at scale. But, as we discussed earlier with that 2.9x debt load, the execution of this COM model and the integration of TYR has to be absolutely flawless.
It really does. There's no room for error.
And that brings us to the final and perhaps most critical part of our analysis today: realistic recovery or forecast risk. Because here is the precarious situation they find themselves in. We have distressed assets being fixed. We have massive $87 million backlogs delayed until 2027. We have a nuclear division waiting for a multi-decade cleanup inflection point while trying to pivot to defense. And we have $365 million in debt requiring constant interest payments. Everything hinges on what happens in the second half of this current year.
Despite the severe Q1 margin squeeze from the accounting rot, management confidently reaffirmed their full year 2026 guidance. They are promising the market $736 million to $758 million in net sales and $136 million to $141 million in Adjusted EBITDA.
But to hit those ambitious numbers, Cadre faces a massive 55% revenue weighting in the second half of 2026, H2. More than half of their entire year's business has to happen in the final 6 months.
It's a steep hill.
If I'm an analyst looking at a chart, a back half-weighted forecast is usually a massive red flag. It often means management missed Q1, they're panicking, and they are just hoping things magically get better in November.
Hockey stick forecasts are incredibly dangerous, yes. But this is where the detailed forecast risk analysis is crucial. You have to ask, is this 55% weighting just hopeful thinking? Or is it a scheduled reality? The analyst report argues that this specific H2 weighting is highly visible and deeply scheduled. It's not a hope, it's a manifest.
And the primary catalyst for that visibility is our old friend, the BMO contract, the Blast Exposure Monitoring System. Remember that $10 million firm tranche we talked about earlier that was booked last year? Management explicitly modeled that $10 million to be a back half shipment. They expect the sensors to completely ship and be billed before the end of the year.
And here is the vital phrase from the transcripts that investors need to circle. Management stated that the $10 million shipment carries no incremental OPEX, no additional operating expenses.
Meaning every single dollar of profit from that $10 million shipment drops straight through the income statement to the bottom line.
Exactly. Because the factory infrastructure is already built, the R&D is completely done, the corporate overhead and administrative salaries are already covered by the rest of the business.
Yeah.
That $10 million acts as a massive lever for H2 margin expansion.
That pure profit drop-through is exactly how they plan to catch up from Q1 and hit that 136 to 141 million EBITDA target.
Exactly.
It's like a sports team down by 10 points at halftime, but they absolutely know their star player is finally entering the game in the third quarter, and the other team has no defense for him. The strategy makes perfect sense, but they have to execute the play.
They do.
If the Department of War suddenly delays the BMO shipment because of bureaucratic hiccup, or if the supply chain for the microchips in those sensors breaks down, the math falls apart.
Or consider the core business. Management also noted that core armored deliveries and duty gear shipments are historically loaded into the back half of the year, particularly the fourth quarter. It's structural seasonality based on when municipalities exhaust their annual budgets. But if that seasonality shifts, if municipalities who are facing budget crunches decide to push those mandatory orders into Q1 of 2027 to balance their own books, that 2.9x leverage suddenly becomes very, very heavy. The debt doesn't care about seasonality. The interest payments are due regardless of when the city signs the purchase order.
Right. They have built an incredible, intricate machine here. The vertical integration of TYR to capture the military, the nuclear hedging between cleanup and defense, the non-discretionary moats that force municipalities to buy. It is a brilliant, almost ruthlessly efficient design. But a highly tuned machine requires perfect timing.
It does. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the financial forensic files, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something that isn't explicitly modeled in the spreadsheets, but shadows this entire industrial strategy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Consider the broader geopolitical landscape. Cadre's entire investment thesis, their massive $355 million backlog, their transition into a defense compounder. It all inherently relies on a permanent state of heightened global threat and stringent domestic safety mandates.
The fundamental assumption that the world will remain dangerous and governments will always pay whatever it takes to protect against that danger.
Precisely. But what happens if global hostilities suddenly de-escalate? What if the European defense spending surge stalls because treaties are signed? Or on the domestic front, if municipal budgets face a catastrophic freeze, a true deep recessionary crunch? How non-discretionary is a 5-year armor refresh cycle, really?
That's a scary thought.
Do rigid safety mandates bend when a municipality is teetering on actual bankruptcy? Do they stretch the armor lifespan to 6 years? 7. Because if the legal mandate bends, the moat drains.
That is the ultimate question. You've built a brilliant financial fortress, but the fortress assumes the siege never ends. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the blueprints and x-rays of Cadre Holdings. We've navigated the M&A rot, the nuclear pivots, and the blast-seeded backlogs. Until next time, risk defined, portfolio protected,